The forest was quiet that evening, blanketed in the muted gold of a setting sun. Thin beams of light broke through the dense canopy above, casting long shadows that danced gently on the forest floor. Clara adjusted her backpack, her boots crunching on the underbrush. She had come here often, this secluded forest on the edge of her hometown. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the endless noise of the city and breathe the crisp, earthy air. But something felt different today. The forest seemed off. She couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the stillness. No birds sang, no leaves rustled with the movement of small animals. It was the kind of silence that pressed against her chest, making her hyper-aware of the sound of her own footsteps. She paused, glancing around, her breath visible in the growing chill of the early evening air. The shadows seemed darker, somehow heavier than usual. Brushing off the unease, she continued deeper into the woods. She had a destination, a hidden lake that few knew about. It was small, surrounded by moss-covered stones, and its still, dark waters always calmed her. She could already picture it in her mind, the reflection of the moon shimmering on the surface as she sat in peace. But tonight, something gnawed at her mind, a faint pressure like she was being watched. A branch snapped behind her. Clara froze, her heart hammering. She turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just rows and rows of darkened trunks fading into the shadows. She waited, holding her breath. Still nothing. Forcing a laugh, she shook her head. It's just a deer, she thought. Or a raccoon. This forest is full of them. But deep down, she didn't believe it. Her instincts told her something was wrong. As she walked further, the unease grew. The forest had taken on an unnatural quality, as if it were holding its breath. The air felt colder now, each gust of wind like icy fingers brushing her cheeks. The light from the setting sun was almost gone, and the shadows stretched like claws across the ground. Clara glanced at her watch. It was later than she thought. She should turn back, she told herself. The lake could wait. Another snap, this time closer. Clara spun around, her pulse racing. Her eyes darted through the trees, searching for movement. The fading light played tricks on her vision, shapes shifting and swaying in the corners of her eyes. Then she saw it, or thought she did. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, standing perfectly still between two trees. It was far enough away that she couldn't make out any details, but something about its silhouette made her blood run cold. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. She took a step back, her boot crunching on the frosty ground. The figure didn't move. She told herself it was a tree, a shadow, anything but what her mind was suggesting. But as she turned to leave, a low sound reached her ears. A deep, guttural growl, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. Almost. Clara's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like they were sinking into the ground. She forced herself to move, walking quickly back the way she came. Her hands trembled as she clutched the straps of her backpack, the sound of her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Don't run, she told herself. Running will make it chase you. But the urge to flee was overwhelming. The growl came again, louder this time, closer. Clara broke into a sprint, the forest blurring around her as she bolted toward the trailhead. The pounding of her boots echoed through the silence, and with every step, she felt it, whatever it was, behind her. She didn't dare look back. The trees seemed endless, closing in around her like a cage. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. A branch snagged her jacket, and she tore it free without slowing down. Her eyes caught glimpses of movement in the corners of her vision, shadows darting between the trees, something long and sinuous weaving through the darkness. She stumbled into a clearing and fell to her knees, gasping for air. For a moment, the world was silent except for her ragged breaths. She dared to look back, her eyes scanning the edge of the clearing. Nothing, just the dark forest, still and silent. Relief flooded her, and she laughed shakily. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe her mind had conjured a monster out of shadows and exhaustion. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. But as she turned to face the path ahead, she froze. It was there, towering above her, its long, spindly limbs unnaturally bent, its pale, leathery skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Its head was too large, its face devoid of features except for a wide, gaping mouth filled with needle-like teeth. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The thing tilted its head almost curiously, and in that moment Clara realized it wasn't just watching her, it was studying her, like a predator deciding how best to devour its prey. She stumbled back, her legs weak and unsteady. The creature didn't follow. Instead, it raised one long clawed hand and pointed at her. A sound like a wet, choking laugh escaped its mouth, and then it melted back into the shadows, leaving only the memory of its impossible shape burned into her mind. Clara ran. She didn't stop until she was out of the forest, the lights of the town guiding her trembling body to safety. But she knew, even as she reached her home, that she was no longer alone. Because when she closed her eyes that night, she saw it, standing at the edge of her bed, watching, waiting.